Okay, let's start. Forget everything you think you know about the Silk Road, starting with, say, Marco Polo and camel trains.
Right.
Your journey to really understanding these huge east-west connections. It actually begins much, much earlier. Think Han Dynasty China.
And the surprising thing, maybe, is that the spark for this massive network, what we now call the Silk Road, it wasn't really about trade, not at first anyway.
Not at all.
It came from a really pressing strategic need.
Exactly. Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're digging into how the Silk Road really began. We're focusing on Emperor Wu, who was incredibly ambitious, and this amazing explorer, Zhang Qian.
Yeah, and for this we're drawing on historical accounts, the records detailing the Han Dynasty's first contacts with Central Asia.
And Emperor Wu's policies, his decisions.
And crucially, the reports from Zhang Qian's own journeys. These are, well, foundational texts.
So our mission for this deep dive, we want to understand how a very specific problem, this constant threat from nomadic groups to the north, how that unintentionally led to opening up this world-changing network.
We'll pull out the key moments, the surprising details, and really try to get a feel for why this period was so pivotal.
Okay, so Emperor Wu. To get him, we need to back up a bit. Look at the early Han Dynasty and their whole situation with the Xiongnu.
These were powerful nomads on their northern border, a major headache for the Han.
And for decades, the Han used this policy called Hekin. What exactly was that?
It translates roughly as harmony through kinship. Basically, they tried to buy peace by sending Han princesses to marry Xiongnu leaders and also sending annual gifts, loads of silk, wine, rice.
Wow, princesses in silk. That sounds, well, expensive and maybe a bit humiliating.
It definitely could be seen that way.
Yeah.
But you have to remember the context. The founder of the Han Dynasty, Emperor Gaozu, he'd actually suffered a really bad defeat against Xiongnu early on.
Okay, so this Hekin was sort of a pragmatic choice.
Exactly. It was a way to manage this powerful neighbor while the Han Dynasty was still, finding its feet, consolidating its power. It bought them time.
You mentioned humiliation, though. That pride aspect is interesting. Sending princesses, valuable goods.
It definitely grated on the Han court. It felt like acknowledging the Xiongnu as equals, which they really didn't like.
So why stick with it for so long if it was unpopular?
Well, alongside this tricky foreign policy, the early emperors, Wen and Jing especially, they were really focused inward.
Building up the state?
Yeah, consolidating power, boosting the economy. That period of internal strengthening was absolutely vital. They needed that solid base, that economic power, before they could even think about taking a more aggressive stance later on.
Right. Which brings us to Emperor Wu. He takes the throne in 141 BCE, and he has different ideas.
Oh, very different. He clearly resented the Xiongnu and this whole Hekin policy. He wasn't content just managing the situation.
He wanted more.
He wanted to expand Chinese influence, project Han power. We also see Confucianism becoming formally adopted during his reign.
The state ideology.
Kind of. It provided the strong framework, though, the practical, sometimes harsh, legalist ideas were still very much in play for governing.
An ambition like that, expanding influence, it costs money.
A lot of money. But luckily for Emperor Wu, the Han Dynasty was doing pretty well economically by then.
All that earlier consolidation paid off.
Absolutely. Years of relative stability, effective governance. It meant the imperial treasury was full. He had the resources to fund his big plans.
So he has the will, he has the means. What's the turning point away from Hekin?
It wasn't overnight. There was a big court conference around 136 BCE. That's where the debate really happened, and the push for a more offensive strategy won out.
A formal decision, then?
Yes. But the real point of no return, the moment the uneasy peace shattered, that was probably the failed ambush at Mei in 133 BCE.
What happened there?
The Han tried to lure the Xiongnu leader, the Xiongnu.
That's their supreme ruler.
Right, they tried to trap him, but he sniffed out the ambush, pulled back. After that, well, the pretense was over. Open conflict was pretty much inevitable.
And there's something else too, right? Something about his skull.
Ah, yes. An external catalyst, you could say. Word reached Emperor Wu about the king of Dayuan, that's a state way out west, in the Ferghana Valley.
Known for horses.
Exactly. Amazing horses. Anyway, the story was the Xiongnu had killed the Dayuan king and were using his skull as a drinking cup.
Grim.
Very. But it apparently caused a lot of resentment in Dayuan towards the Xiongnu. Emperor Wu saw a potential opening there.
An ally. Someone else who hated the Xiongnu.
Potentially. It all feeds into this shift towards a much more proactive, sometimes aggressive foreign policy.
Okay, so how do they actually start pushing west?
Military campaigns, I assume?
Big time. Emperor Wu had some brilliant generals. Wei Qing and Hu Kubing are the most famous. They really led the charge.
Okay, tell me about their successes. Wei Qing captured the Ordos region in 127 BCE. Why was that important?
The Ordos. It's that area inside the big loop of the Yellow River. Strategically vital.
It was a major staging ground for Xiongnu raids into Han territory. Taking it back seriously hampered their ability to attack. A big defensive win.
Got it. And then Hu Kuping. He conquered the Hexi corridor in 121 BCE. That sounds important too.
Hugely important. The Hexi corridor is that long, narrow passage
Between the Tibetan Plateau and the Gobi Desert?
That's the one. It's the bottleneck. The only practical land route from central China out towards the Tarim Basin and the western regions.
He isn't controlling that.
Controlling that meant the Han controlled access to the west. And crucially, it cut the Xiongnu off from the Chang people in the south, who could have been allies or a source of support for them. It was a masterstroke, really.
And it kept pushing. There was a Gobi campaign.
Yeah, 119 BCE. Both Wei Qing and He Kuobing led massive armies deep into the Gobi Desert.
What was the result?
It was a major blow to the Xiongnu. Weakened their main forces significantly, pushed them much further north, away from Han borders. These victories were absolutely essential. They showed Han's strength and, well, they cleared the path westward.
Paved the way, so to speak.
Literally, in some ways. Winning battles is one thing, but holding the territory is another.
Right. So what did they do to consolidate?
After the victories, Emperor Wu set up military garrisons, administrative centers, commanderies, they called them, places like Juquan and Wuwei, around 115 BCE.
And the Great Wall.
They extended it, repaired older sections, and pushed it much further west, all the way out to Dunhuang.
So these fortifications, they weren't just military.
No, they had multiple functions. Protection, yes, for settlers and locals, but also guiding and protecting envoys, merchants, anyone heading west.
Like infrastructure for the future Silk Road.
Exactly. And they also served to further isolate the Xiongnu, cutting off their connections to other groups in the Tarim Basin.
It's fascinating how these steps, all driven by dealing with the Xiong threat,
Ended up creating the foundation for something completely different, something much bigger.
You mentioned the protectorate of the western regions before. That came later, but Wu laid the groundwork.
Absolutely. His military campaigns, the garrisons, the wall, all of that established a Han presence and control system. It made the formal protectorate, established in 60 BCE, a logical next step for managing these newly engaged Western territories. He didn't see it happen, but he made it possible.
Okay, so the military and strategic pieces are falling into place, but this is still mostly about security and control. How does it turn into actual interaction exchange? The stuff we think of with the Silk Road.
Now we get to Zhang Qian. His story is just incredible, and it starts, again, with the Xiongnu problem.
His first mission wasn't about trade.
Not directly. It was military diplomatic. The goal was very specific. Find the Yuezhi people.
Who were they?
A group who'd been badly beaten by the Xiongnu and forced to migrate west, settling far away. Sometimes the texts call them Ruzi.
And the Han plan?
Find the Yuezhi, convince them to ally with the Han against the Xiongnu, a kind of pincer movement attacking from east and west.
Clever, if they could pull it off. And Zhang Qian himself. Who was he?
Seems he was a palace attendant, maybe a junior officer. What we know is he volunteered for this incredibly dangerous mission.
Brave man.
Definitely. He set off around 138, maybe 139 BCE, had about 100 men with him, and crucially, a guide named Ganfu.
Who was Ganfu?
A Xiongnu man who'd been captured by the Han. His knowledge would prove invaluable.
Okay, so they head west. What happens?
Disaster, almost immediately. They leave Han territory and boom, captured by the Xiongnu.
Just like that.
Just like that. Zhang Qian ends up being held captive for, well, over 10 years.
10 years. Surely that's mission over.
You'd think so. They even gave him a Xiongnu wife. He had a son there. But somehow, through all that time, he apparently never gave up on his Han mission. His loyalty remained.
Incredible.
And eventually, he and Ganfu managed to escape, after a decade.
Wow. So where did they go then after escaping?
They pushed on westward, past Lop Nor, skirting the northern edge of that huge, dangerous Taklamakan desert. They traveled through kingdom after kingdom.
What were some of the key places he visited? What did he find?
Well, first major stop was Dayuan, in the Ferghana Valley.
The place with the horses.
The very same. He noted they were sophisticated, lived in cities, saw remnants of Greek influence there, from Alexander the Great's time, the Greco-Bactrians. And yes, he saw the heavenly horses. Powerful steeds.
Did he find the Yuezhi?
He did. They'd moved further west, conquered a region called Daxia, which is ancient Bactria. They'd settled down and were doing pretty well, actually.
So did they want revenge on the Xiongnu? Ready for an alliance?
No. Not interested. They were comfortable, prosperous, had no desire to go back east and fight the Xiongnu again.
So the main goal of the mission failed.
The primary military goal, yes. But what Zhang Qian saw in Daxia Bactria was really interesting.
What was that?
He found Chinese goods in their markets, specifically shoe cloth from Sichuan and bamboo staffs from Qian.
Chinese goods? How did they get all the way out there?
That was the question. He learned they'd come up from the south through a place called Xiongnu, ancient India. So this showed there were already trade routes, indirect ones, linking China to India and then onward to Bactria, even before the Silk Road proper.
Mind blown. So connections existed, just not the ones the Han knew about.
Exactly. He also gathered intelligence, secondhand info about places even further west, like Anxi, that's Parthia, and Tiaozi, Mesopotamia, and the Wusun people nearby.
He must have been taking meticulous notes.
You have to assume so. The journey back was just as dangerous. Got captured by the Xiongnu again.
No way.
Yep. Held for about another year. Finally escaped during some kind of internal chaos among the Xiongnu. Made it back to the Han capital, Chang'an.
With his 100 men.
No, just him. And Ganfu, only 2 returned.
Incredible, just the 2 of them. So the alliance mission failed, but the information.
The information was revolutionary, absolutely invaluable. Despite the failure on the main objective, Zhang Qian's report completely changed how the Han saw the world beyond their borders.
What were the key takeaways from his report?
Okay, so sophisticated civilizations exist out west. They weren't just scattered barbarians. 2, their military power seemed, well, maybe not as strong as the Han assumed. 3, they really liked Han goods, especially silk. 4, those Ferghana horses were real, and they are amazing. 5, those indirect trade routes through India existed.
That's a lot of game-changing intelligence.
It totally shifted the perspective in Chang'an, opened up this whole vista of new strategic and, crucially, economic possibilities.
So Emperor Wu's focus broadened. It wasn't just about beating the Xiongnu anymore.
Precisely. Zhang Qian's reports made him think bigger, about actively opening up these western regions, not just neutralizing a threat, but engaging, trading, influencing.
A much more complex strategy starts to form.
Yes, a multifaceted approach. Seeking alliances still, yes, but also securing resources those horses, promoting trade, and generally extending Han power and prestige westward.
And Zhang Qian wasn't done traveling, was he? He went back out.
He did. His second big mission was around 119 to 115 BCE. This time, the destination was the Wusun people, who live north of the Tarim Basin.
Another attempt at an anti-Xiongnu alliance.
That was part of it, yeah, but also just broader diplomatic outreach, establishing friendly relations. This time, the mission was much bigger. 300 men.
Signaling serious intent.
And carrying huge amounts of gifts, silk, valuables. This is where you really see that tribute trade diplomacy kicking in. Give gifts, establish relations, hope for reciprocal missions, and trade.
And did he send people elsewhere too?
Yes, this time he dispatched assistant envoys from the Wusun court to many other key places. Dayuan, Kangju, Daxia, Anxi, even Chengdu, India, spreading the diplomatic net wide.
Did it work? Did these places respond?
Yeah, it seems so. We start seeing reciprocal missions, Central Asian states sending their own envoys to Chang'an. There's even a record of Parthian envoys showing up around 100 BCE, so the connections were definitely being made.
But it wasn't all peaceful diplomacy. You mentioned the horses again, the War of the Heavenly Horses.
Right. Diplomacy has its limits, especially when Emperor Wu really wanted something. And he really wanted those Ferghana horses from Dayuan.
For his cavalry.
For his cavalry, yeah. But Dayuan refused to sell them in the quantities he wanted. Or maybe refused altogether. The sources vary.
So Emperor Wu
went to war around 104 BCE, sent an army. The first attempt actually failed badly.
Really?
Yeah, logistical nightmare, long distances. But Wu didn't give up. He sent a second, much larger, much better supplied army.
And the second time?
Success. They besieged the Dayuan capital, forced them to hand over thousands of the best horses, and even pressured them into executing their own king who had resisted the Han demands.
Wow. So the Diplomacy backed by force.
Oh.
Or maybe force following diplomacy.
It shows the mix, doesn't it? Emperor Wu was willing to use both carrots and sticks to achieve his aims in the West.
Okay, so we've got the military securing the routes like the Hexi Corridor.
Right.
We've got Zhang Qian's explorations opening eyes and minds. We've got active diplomacy, both giving gifts and sending armies.
It's all coming together.
This really feels like the moment the Silk Road truly begins.
I think that's fair to say. Zhang Qian's journeys were the catalyst. Sustained contact starts happening. Trade routes expand noticeably around 114 BCE. And it's crucial to remember this early phase was heavily state-sponsored.
The Han government was actively facilitating it.
Definitely. Securing the Hexi Corridor was huge. Building those garrisons, the watchtowers, extending the wall, that long-walled defense line. It provided the security, the infrastructure that allowed merchants to travel with, well, at least some degree of safety.
So what was actually moving along these routes in the early days? What were the first goods exchanged?
Okay, from China outwards. Silk. Silk was the absolute killer app, hugely valuable in the West.
Anything else?
Oh yeah. Lacquerware, which was uniquely Chinese then. Ceramics, cast iron tools and goods. Han China was very advanced in ironworking. Bronze mirrors, jewelry, ornaments. Paper came much later, though.
And coming into China, what did they want from the West?
Number one, horses. Those Ferghana horses were a military game changer. Jade was also highly prized, especially from Khotan in the Tarim Basin.
What else?
Spices, fragrances from India and beyond. Glassware, often Roman or Egyptian made, which was a real novelty in China. Precious metals, different kinds of textiles, wools, furs.
So it wasn't just goods, right? You mentioned agriculture.
Huge impact there. Lots of new crops came into China via these routes. Grapes, for example. Viticulture starts. Alfalfa, absolutely essential fodder for the horses they were importing.
What else? Things we eat today.
Walnuts, cucumbers, garlic, celery, pomegranates, sesame seeds, broad beans, even spinach eventually. Zhang Qian himself is often credited with bringing back seeds for several of these.
That's amazing. Changing the landscape, literally.
Right.
What about technology?
Well, over the long run, sericulture silk production eventually leaked out westward. That took centuries, though. Papermaking also went west later. Maybe crossbow technology went west. Some debate there. And the Kharez irrigation system, those underground water channels. That technology seems to have spread from Persia into the Tarim Basin, facilitated by the increased connectivity. Gunpowder, printing, those are much later innovations going west.
And culture, ideas, religion.
That's maybe the most profound exchange of all, long-term. Buddhism is the huge one. It starts trickling eastward from India along these routes during the Han, maybe the very late Han. Its impact on China and East Asia would be immense.
Art styles, too.
Yes, you see Greco-Buddhist art styles influencing Buddhist art as it moved east. Musical instruments traveled. 2 new types of lutes appear in China. And just knowledge exchange, geography, medicine, astronomy. Ideas flowed in both directions.
It really is transformative.
Yeah.
Far beyond just buying and selling silk or horses.
Absolutely. It affected military power, agriculture, diet, art, religion, science, almost every aspect of life eventually.
It's just incredible to think that this vast network impacting civilizations for centuries really kicked off because of strategic calculations about border security.
Yeah, the law of unintended consequences, maybe. Emperor Wu wanted security and horses. He got that, but he also inadvertently set in motion this incredible engine of global exchange.
So if we boil it down, the genesis really rests on 2 pillars. Emperor Wu's vision and resources.
His strategic drive, his willingness to commit the state's military and economic power. Definitely.
And Zhang Qian's incredible resilience and the intelligence he gathered.
His sheer determination, his explorations, the information he brought back that opened Han eyes to the wider world, he truly opened the way. Their combined actions laid this foundation.
An enduring foundation for centuries of contact.
East-West interaction, yeah. And like we said, the legacy goes way beyond just trade goods. It's culture, religion, technology, ideas, fundamental things that shaped civilizations.
It really is something. All starting because a Han emperor had a problem with nomads on his northern border. It really makes you think, doesn't it?
It does.
Consider how those seemingly quite separate goals, military security, getting better horses, could accidentally spark one of history's biggest eras of global connection.
What unexpected consequences, might our own strategic aims or economic pursuits today have centuries down the line?
A provocative thought to end on, something to definitely mull over.